What's up, everybody? It's Professor Gnome, and today we're going to be looking at the top 5 budget decks that you can play right now. I built these decks through a combination of going to my local game store and picking up the remaining cards online for about $30 to $35. I'd recommend, if you're following any of these lists or any other list that you find online, to try your local game store first to help not only support them, but you'll typically be able to find all the loose singles and commons that you're looking for a fraction of the price that you would either find them online and not have to pay the shipping cost as well. So I just thought I'd throw that in as a slight recommendation for anyone who either hasn't tried going to theirs yet or just didn't know that that was an option. Also, for a lot of these lists, I've been able to play them on the channel already, so if you want to see them in action and see gameplay of them before you buy them in person, then definitely check out the other videos that I've already made. I'll leave a link in the description to each different deck that I've already featured, and I'll try to get to the other ones as soon as I possibly can. So if this is something you like, definitely let me know in the comments down below, and make sure to subscribe and like the video. But without further ado, we'll get into deck number 5, Aegislash EX. Aegislash EX is actually really strong and surprisingly difficult to get past for certain decks because of its damage immunity to Pokemon V and EX. It actually can become a surprisingly hard thing to get off the board. Most decks either run only 1 to 2 Pokemon that are allowed to even damage it in the first place. And so through a combination of being able to boss them up early or pivot around them or use Aegislash EX to actually get high damage knockouts on them, you kind of become invulnerable in certain positions. Alongside having the option to play Path, there's not really much your opponent can do once you've laid down Path and double Aegislash and have them actually powered up. They kind of run out of options because they can't boss or creature capture around you, and they can't use their abilities either in most cases. You also hit for weakness against a large amount of good matchups, so you hit for weakness against Iron Valiant, you hit for weakness against Chenpao, which can actually make Aegislash hit for way more damage than you would expect it to, considering its initial low base damage. Also, thanks to cards like Raihan, we're actually able to reset up even after we lose an Aegislash and put ourselves in a pretty powerful position. We have a slow early game, but we can fix that thanks to VIP Pass and the TM for Evolution, alongside other stadiums like Artisan, allowing us to make sure we always have the ability to set up our basics and get everything into play. You could also switch out Artisan for something like Temple of Sinnoh in order to have more lockdown ability over special energies to hit things like Lugia EX and shore up some other matchups that may be a little bit difficult. Coming in at number 4, we have Celestine EX. Celestine EX is really strong, and comboed again with Path to the Peak, Panic Mask, and Vanilla Ice, we're able to shut down our opponent and leave them in a position where there's very little that they can do, along with the ability to completely take over the game and take all the prize cards that we need in about a single turn, with Hisui and Braviary being able to put the last 30 damage we need after Celestine EX's attacks onto the board and kind of just take over and either win the game outright after a bit of setup, or to pick and choose the exact things that we need to knock out. With Panic Mask on the board and attached to things like our Braviary or our Celestine, it makes it so our opponent can't just boss up the thing they need in order to knock us out before we're able to get our Vanilla into play. Once Vanilla is into play, there's really not much our opponent has the ability to do to us, because everything under 40 HP doesn't have the ability to attack any longer, which is really strong and kind of broken in ways when your opponent's not prepared to deal with it, because a lot of times what players will do is that they don't realize exactly how it works, so they'll play down Jirachi, but Celestine, being a evolution Pokemon, gets past Jirachi, gets past other board bench blockers, and so we really don't have too much of a problem playing around and being able to manipulate most matchups. We also have the advantage that Irida allows us to get into our rare candies and grab either the Celestine or the Vanilla Ice and really get going is much faster than a lot of players expect to have happen to them. So they're not always prepared when they see the Bounce Suite to know to get rid of it immediately. So you're able to place Bounce Suite. You only need a single energy, and that's also why we run things like Arvin and the Chorus Experiment, because it allows us to grab just about everything we need and get into our plays super early. So it's a really, really strong deck, but still not the strongest that we can have on this list. Coming in at number 3, we have Zoroark and like Zoroark box. I think this deck is really going under the radar. It actually performed decently well at LAIC and has really, really weird kind of spread damage or like spread possibilities that it's able to set up and do really well with. You're able to pivot out your Zoroark and go into the exact Pokemon you need thanks to being able to put them all into the discard pile pretty fast to either always hit for weakness or always have the card out that you need at the exact right moment that you need it. And it can get kind of awkward, but a lot of times you have things like Slowbro that if your opponent only has 1 prize card remaining, then you take 2, allowing you to steal out games from somebody who's unsuspecting. You can hit for weakness with Mightyena and be able to close out games really easily that way. Then there's also ways that you're able to use Scyther, grab yourself supporters with Gallade, or hit for weakness with one of your other options. And it actually becomes really, really powerful, especially when your opponent isn't suspecting or knows exactly what they're doing. And you're able to catch opponents off guard really, really easily. And I think it's actually a really, really strong deck that goes under the radar and is probably the cheapest out of all of these decks to build. I built this one for about, I think it was only like $25. So I definitely give it a shot, especially if you're on the lower end of budget. Because the only card in this entire list that costs just about anything is pretty much only the Iono. The deck taking our number 2 spot is actually going to be Snorlax Stall. This deck is, in my opinion, not the most fun to play, but probably one of the best out there for budget decks that you can play and top even something at a much higher level. We saw this a lot at LAIC. And the way that it works is that you pretty much are just going to play your Snorlaxes into the active spot, stop your opponent from retreating, use things like the Misfortune Sisters to start removing all their resources, and just using things like Creature Capture and Boss's Orders to make sure that you're always in control of what's in your opponent's active, making their plays as limited as possible, and really just stalling them out. There's not a lot that this deck really does for itself. A lot of times you're just going to be playing a Misfortune and passing, using your Rotom V to draw cards, having the Pidgeot V to make sure that you never end up decking yourself out, and really just looping that forever and watching your opponent struggle to find a way to get past you, and 89% of the time they're going to fail. So it's not maybe the most interactive deck or the most action-packed, but it's definitely the cheapest for the most amount of success that you can have. I think this deck was about $20 to build, and even that you could get to be cheaper by cutting the Ionos and cutting the VIP path if you really want it to, though I wouldn't fully recommend it since everything else is extremely cheap. You may as well invest in picking up the Ionos just so you have them for any other deck that you decide to play. This deck can be really, really frustrating for your opponents, but if that's something you're totally okay with, which I recommend, make sure you're having fun is the most important part. And so yeah, I highly recommend this one, but I still don't believe it takes our number 1 spot, which brings us into our last and final deck. Coming in at number 1, in my opinion, the best budget deck out there that you can play right now is actually Cloth. And the reason I think this is that you have an amazing matchup spread into just about everything. You can win with first turn donks, you can take over the game super early, you require very, very few resources, and really there's not a whole lot that your opponent can do, considering that you can even play the game without ever using Voltorbs, and some lists don't run them at all. And so you're always trading with single prizers. You're always able to attack. You're able to limit the game as much as possible. You can hit for an insane amount of damage incredibly quickly. And right now, Voltorb V is kind of going up in price a little bit, so I would grab it now if you're trying to play this deck. Definitely go to your local game store, try to pick some up on the cheaper side because their price is going up. But at the time I built this, they were still only about $5 to $6 a piece. So you're able to grab those with the Ionos, and everything else is incredibly cheap to build. The deck is super, super powerful, and I highly, highly recommend giving this a shot. If you can't play it in person, it's super, super easy to build on PTCGO and throw together and absolutely take over the game, and climb the ladder with really, really well. You could also cut the seal stone if you were kind of short or need it to cut corners or cut costs some other way. You could cut the seal stone, but honestly, I would recommend just cutting 2 Ionos and filling this in with something else and save your money in order to get the seal stone, because running one of this is far more important than running 4 Iono. But that's just in my opinion. Definitely play around and test the deck in other ways. But yeah, so this, guys, is going to be my top 5 budget decks that I think all of these are super, super strong, super, super competitive, and you can have a ton of fun playing them and don't cost that much to make. Like I said, I think the most expensive out of all of these decks is this cloth one, because of the fact that Voltorb is going up and you run the Seal Stone with the Ionos, but you can cut 2 Ionos. You can run it without the Seal Stone if you want, and like I said, trade or pick up the Voltorbs at your local game store, and all of this can be made pretty simply and at a fraction of the cost of having to buy things and pay like shipping costs off like TCG Player or something like that. So I highly recommend it, guys, and definitely let me know what you think of this style of content. This is the first list like this that I've done, so it was a little awkward to kind of film and put together. But let me know if this is something you'd want to see more of, and along with other like top lists and like meta looks and stuff like that. But yeah, make sure to like, comment, subscribe, all that kind of stuff if this is something that you want to see more of, or there's a deck you want featured out of any of these. Yeah, but I'll see you guys in the next one. I really appreciate all the support. So peace, guys. See you around.